Good morning. Today we're going to look at Matthew 12, verses 1 through 23. And Jesus is traveling, and he and his disciples are walking through a grain field or alongside a grain field. Most likely they wouldn't just walk right through it as they were traveling, but as they were doing that, his disciples, it says, were hungry. So they were plucking heads of wheat and eating that. They shelling it out. I mean, most of us have done that. You grab a head of wheat and you shell it out like that, and you blow the chaff out of your hand and you eat the kernels. And for whatever reason, the Pharisees aren't so far away, and they're watching. They see this happen. And it's just one more of those reminders for us that Jesus was under the scrutiny of the religious leaders, of the people. And I mean, the crowds were following him just, and we read that today too, that the crowds around him were just, a mass, and it's just, you picture the biggest crowd, the tightest knit crowd that you've ever been in, and that's kind of the way I see Jesus a lot of times. Maybe a little space around him, but, people, and always watching. And think about what it's like when you're doing something and someone is watching you. Not just casually watching, not just, happening to observe, but watching, checking out, And, when you're under that scrutiny, it can get a little bit disgruntling. You can feel a little bit odd from it. But anyway, this was the case for Jesus. These religious leaders were watching to find something that he's doing wrong, of course, because if he's a sinner, he can't be the Messiah. If he's doing other than what God would have, well, he can't be the Messiah. He's got to be just somebody just coming in and doing. But they watch, and they see his disciples shelling out this grain. It says they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to Jesus. They didn't say to the disciples, hey, don't do that. They said to Jesus, look at what your disciples are doing. Look at what your followers are doing. Look at what these people that you have chosen to be with you are doing. They're setting a bad example. They're working on the Sabbath. And, can we not eat on the Sabbath? Can we not prepare a meal on the Sabbath? They weren't supposed to travel very far on the Sabbath. So what were these guys all out there doing? Why were these Pharisees out, watching? How could they be traveling with Jesus too, unless they were sinning just as well? There's so many questions, so many wonderings, and all of those things really don't matter. What matters is that Jesus says to them that this is okay. He says, I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. It isn't these laws that are so important. He says, didn't you hear what David did when he was hungry? He went into the sanctuary, into the temple, and ate the bread of the presence, which was strictly forbidden. This bread of the presence was 12 loaves of bread, one for each of the tribes of Israel, that were always there, ready, for the Lord. And just a reminder that it was the 12 tribes of Israel, and that this bread, it would be eaten, by the priests later on, but, for someone to come in off of the street and eat it, well, that was forbidden, greatly forbidden. But David did that. He entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence. He says, which was not lawful for him or his companions, but only for the priests. And then he says, or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, priests break the Sabbath, and yet they are guiltless. The priests break the Sabbath, yet they are guiltless. And, it's just, it isn't in Matthew's gospel that Jesus says that, man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. Sabbath was made for humankind so that we would have this time of rest, of rejuvenation, a time that we would take as well, time to worship. The Sabbath was a time to worship God, but also for rejuvenation of our bodies. Because if you work all day long, every day, I mean, you just get worn out, and we need that rest. And so Jesus is saying that, the day of rest, the day of Sabbath, is for our benefit. It's for the benefit of the people. And he says, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He's talking about himself when he says the Son of Man, and I just commented on that, I believe, yesterday. But, the Son of Man, Jesus, he's saying that I am the Lord of the Sabbath. He's basically claiming to be the Messiah. But do they listen? Do they hear? No, they don't hear that in him either. So it says he left that place and entered their synagogue. So from this wheat field that they were walking alongside of, or maybe it was a barley field, what they were eating. But so they went then into the synagogue. And in the synagogue, there was a man. Think about this man. It said that he had a withered hand. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And in the version I read in my house this morning, it said this man was blind, he was deaf, and crippled. Here is just this one. Has a withered hand, unless I'm not reading far enough. But he says to the man, "Stretch out your hand and be healed," and he does. So Jesus heals on the Sabbath. More work that Jesus is doing on the Sabbath. And it says the Pharisees went out and conspired against him to destroy him. They wanted to get rid of this Jesus who was coming in with these new ideas and different ways of doing things. And, how often do we squash a new idea? We've never done it that way before, or this is the way we always do it. We can't change. We can't do anything different. But, and as much as they were watching for the Messiah, they expected the Messiah to fit into their little box as to what they expected of the Messiah. And Jesus definitely wasn't. He didn't fill any of those categories, born to this little humble people and no education. He hadn't studied in the temples. He had no credentials. And yet here he is coming in with all of this new stuff to think about and trying to change things. And it was hard. But, Jesus understood their intent, and he understood their displeasure with him, as maybe I should just say it that way. So he left from there. And of course, when he leaves from there, they still have people watching him. They still have people following and, reporting back to them of the things that Jesus says and does. So verse 15 says, when he became aware of this, the Pharisees' intent, he departed. Many crowds followed him, and he cured all of them. And it's just, the people came to Jesus with this need of healing because it was, he filled their needs. He changed their lives. He gave them a new outlook on everything that way, in all of this healing and everything, and he healed. It says he healed all of them and told them not to tell anybody. Well, we've all heard that before from Jesus, and we know that, they couldn't keep quiet. Well, and if they would go back home healed, people would notice. It wasn't something that could be kept secret, that could be kept quiet. And so the more that Jesus healed, the more good that he did, the more it was evidence that the Pharisees and the religious leaders had against Jesus for doing all of these things that he was doing. And then we have a quote, from Isaiah, that Jesus uses this. Jesus again knows the scriptures, well, I guess maybe Jesus didn't say it, but the writer, Matthew, quoted from Isaiah, and verse 21, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. And so as much as Jesus was sent for the Jews, and it was the Jewish religious leaders that were most upset and everything by that, But as Jesus instructed his disciples later to go out, to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Samaria, to the ends of the earth, it was forever. And so the Gentiles would hear the word of God as well. And then, this is where they brought to him a demoniac who was blind and mute. The last couple of verses we read. So this is, the man with the withered hand in the temple was one thing, but here we have this demoniac. He's possessed by a demon, so that he can't speak, he can't hear, and or he's blind and mute. I guess he can't see or talk. And Jesus cured him. And I mean, this was, for someone who is blind to be able to see, for someone who can't speak to be able to speak, are things that people notice. I mean, you can't hide that. I mean, if he restores the hearing to someone, I mean, that's, the person that can hear notices that more than anything. But, he casts this demon out that is causing this man to be, blind and mute. And people begin to ask the question, can this be? Can this be the Son of David, the Messiah? Can Jesus be the one? And, you think about it, when I think about all of this, beginning with the baptism of Jesus by John, with, John pointing, at Jesus and the Spirit of God is descending in a dove, this is my Son. How many more signs, how many more things do they need to put together that Jesus is the Messiah? And it's same in today's world too. I mean, there are many people that need more evidence, or they need something more than what Jesus has done. So thankfully, those of us that know Jesus trust that he is indeed the Son of God.